Story is not about me. I hope it's about you. I've already heard a couple of stories here today about the things that got you interested in rivers and in clean water. And so I'm really just going to tell you a story about how I did and how I was leveraged into what I'm doing now, even though I resisted it. And hope that it resonates in some way with you, and also hope that it allows you to see outside yourself about why we do this work. I've heard people talk about their love of nature in ways where it's all about them. Pardon?
Closer to the mic.
Okay. And I've heard people talk about their love of nature where it's all about them. And we've got to realize that we're doing this for people that are not born yet. And the work is about their ability to make money and make a living as much as it is to have access to clean water to drink and to play in. The story starts for me about 40 years ago in 1971, 1972, when my grandfather, Rogers, told me that he was buying a canoe and we were going to start paddling together. That was just something he announced one day. I think it was at Christmas time. Of course, I was very excited about that. I already loved the water, but I'd never been canoeing in my life. His wife, my grandmother, and my father immediately pronounced that this would be a disaster and that we would either lose our lives or lose some property or cause inconvenience to a lot of people or whatever. There's a streak of paranoia and insanity in my family that we come by honestly, and it's well represented in me, but better represented in my father and my grandmother. Those of you that are from the South know that Flannery OConnor's stories are actually true, and they're not fiction. Those of you that are not just need to take my word for it. The story really starts, though, back in 1929, when my grandfather went to that school called the University of Florida. I can barely stand saying that. As a freshman, before the market crashed, and then the market crashes, and he mails back the money from all but one pair of socks that he sold to his father in Miami. He literally sold all but one pair of socks and wrote in a letter with the $2 that he sent back to Miami, saying, "I only need one pair of socks, and you need this for the family business." Wow, $2. You need this for the family business. I'm telling you things I didn't know about until much later. You fast forward, he shut down that same family business in 1942. Wasn't drafted, volunteered for the Army, wound up serving as a medic at the battalion level in Patton's 3rd Army. Obviously was not in the D-Day invasion, but went into France across the beaches at Normandy, was in that push across France. He was in the 1st Medical Unit that relieved Bastogne. You can imagine what he saw there. He was also in the 1st Medical Unit that liberated Buchenwald. You can imagine what he saw there. This is a man that had worked outside of himself and for other people for many years before I was ever born. So on the day when we finally hit the water paddling, the year of the Watergate hearings, whatever year that was, 72 or 73, I was 12 or 13 years old. It was on the Ochlockonee River, which rises in South Georgia and flows to the Gulf of Mexico, a little bit west of Tallahassee and south of Tallahassee. I didn't know my grandfather very well. I didn't know the story or stories that I just told you and many more about him. He was not a stranger to me. I'd known him for 12 or 13 years. But I didn't know everything there was to know about him. Well, I learned a lot on this particular trip. We loaded up, launched the boat, had all of our water, our food, a half shelter. That's how he camped. no mosquito netting. Made it 16 or 17 miles the first day down the Ochlockonee and set up camp. Neither he nor I slept that first night because of the lack of mosquito netting. And we got up the next day before dawn, started, because we really had never fallen asleep, did not spend a lot of time messing around with breakfast, just ate a very light breakfast. And about dawn, some fishermen came down to the river and said, "You got a lot of water there, don't you?" Well, we thought they were talking about all these milk jugs full of water that we had, but what they were really talking about was how much water was in the river. That's how ignorant we were of this particular river and of hydrology in general. The river was up and it was rising. We started paddling and noticed that there were no sandbars, noticed that the river was all out in the woods. In fact, went down a couple of oxbows that we had to paddle back out of and get back in the main river because we were having a hard time figuring out where the river was. Started about 2 in the afternoon wondering, are we going to even be able to find a place to camp? Because the river's so high, the terrain is so flat, and everything's underwater. And there'd be a bluff every now and then, private property, every time. 4 o'clock, still no place to camp. 5 o'clock, still no place to camp. We've been paddling since about 7:30, had eaten lunch in the canoe. 6 o'clock, still no place to camp. 7 o'clock, still no place to camp. And we wind up about 7:30 getting down to a piece of private property with a boat ramp that was, by the way, an oyster shell boat ramp, which tells you how close we were getting to the Gulf. When we added this up later, we had paddled 37 miles that day. A 13-year-old and a 64-year-old. Of course, was tough as nails. And we walked up to the house, and there was this old man in the house, and I remember the Watergate. This is why I remember it very clearly. The TV was running, and who was the chairman of that committee? I can't remember his name, but his face was on the TV. Who was it? Yeah, Sam Urban, I think. His face was on the television. We're standing at the screen door. And my grandfather's asking for permission to camp at this place. And he gets in a conversation with this guy, last name of Crum, C-R-U-M. If you go down around Choppy, Florida and Panacea, you'll still run into a bunch of people that have that last name. It's one of those counties where you got 6 or 7 last names, kind of like Brantley County, Georgia, and that's it. That's all the last names there are. And they got in a conversation that I wasn't really paying attention to. I was just kind of sitting there, tired as I could be, 13 years old, hungry, wondering what to do next. And my grandfather turns around to me and he says, "Gordon, go set up camp and fix supper." Yes, sir. So I went and set up camp and fixed supper, and my grandfather's standing there talking to this guy, and he comes down later. I've got camp set up, supper's fixed, we eat. I said, "Granddaddy, what was going on up there?" He said, "Well, Mr. Crumb's dying of cancer. He needed somebody to talk to." Well, that hit me like a ton of bricks. Here's a 64-year-old man who's paddled his behind off with no sleep, and he's got time. He's got time to talk to somebody. And that level of compassion, that taught me a lot about how to be a human, about how to work for other people. Fast forward a lot more years to 2004. I had lost my job, wondering what to do next. Charter fishing down around St. Simons to make a little money. Had an opportunity to be a river keeper for the Satilla. Not really sure if I wanted to do that or not. I was used to making a lot of money, and I knew that there wouldn't be a lot of money in it. And I was used to a certain group of friends. Some of them at DNR, where I had worked for 10 years, ending about 9 years before that. Some of them in the fishing community, the banking community, my church. And I knew that I'd be suing some of my friends because I knew the Riverkeeper model. I had been on the founding board of Altamaha Riverkeeper. I knew exactly what it meant. And in fact, I wound up suing one of my best friends within a year, the people at Coastal Resources Division. And thankfully that relationship has survived to this day. So I was sitting there one day asking my wife, asking my friends, what am I supposed to do here? I feel called to do this, but is this really what I want to do? And 2 days later, a letter arrives in the mail from my mom. No note. And it's a newsletter from the National Park Conservation Association. I believe that's what it's called. It's the outfit that Sarah Barmeyer, some of you know her, works for now in Washington, D.C. And on the back page is this tribute to my grandfather, who, when he died in 2002, had given a bunch of money to that organization as part of his bequest. And in this article about him, there was a paragraph where he talked about how much I had taught him about the natural world. He was literally speaking to me from beyond the grave, saying, son, take the job, do the work. Thank you.